Hello and welcome to Trellis Studio. I'm Grant Harrison, Vice President of Sustainable Finance and ESG with Trellis Group, and I'm excited to be speaking today with Maura Hodge, Partner and Sustainability Leader with KPMG U.S. Maura, it's a pleasure to have you here with us.
Thanks for having me, Grant. Glad to be here.
So, interoperability is a key word in the ESG reporting world. Tell us a bit about what you see as the biggest challenges companies are facing in trying to satisfy multiple frameworks simultaneously, and how companies are navigating this complexity.
What I like to say is that previously, under voluntary reporting standards, we had an alphabet soup that everybody hated and complained about. But the reality was that you could kind of pick and choose whichever letters you wanted to pull out and do what you wanted. We are now moving into a world where we have a patchwork of regulations that are becoming compulsory and have regulatory oversight over top of them. And the challenge is to try to understand all of those regulations, where and at what level you have to comply. So is it the subsidiary or the global consolidated company or somewhere in between? And then what are the nuances between all of those regulations in order to be able to check all of the boxes to say that you've met the requirements? And so that's why interoperability is so important. We know that a lot of the climate standards have been really based in the GHG protocol or TCFD, and that's great. And that means that a lot of companies have a great place to start. But now that they have to follow all of the rules, understanding the differences and the nuances in these regulations versus those standards is what's really important. So defining that up front, making sure you're collecting all of the data at the lowest level of granularity possible actually allows you and sets you up for success in the longer term.
And as this soup recipe changes or maybe matures, Trellis Studio viewers will know that sustainability assurance is becoming more rigorous and standardized. What data quality and control issues do you find companies are most often unprepared for when they first come and seek assurance? And what advice generally would you give to companies who are starting their sustainability assurance journeys?
The same word 3 times: documentation, documentation, and more documentation. We all know about the concept of audit trails, making sure that you have information that ultimately supports the information that you are putting out into the public. And that is absolutely critical in order to be able to get through the assurance process. Both having those underlying invoices and documents that support the calculations you've done, but also some of the judgments that have been made in the process, making sure those are written down and it's clear how you got to the answer that you're getting to. A lot of these rules actually have room for policy decisions and judgments to be made. And so making sure that all of that thought process is written down somewhere is really critical for your assurance provider to be able to understand what you've done and then ultimately sign off on it. And then the last piece of it is really the disclosure. So I always say it's one thing to be able to put a number on a page and say we've emitted 500 metric tons of carbon dioxide. But if you think about financial statements or other types of reports, there's often pages and pages of footnotes that go along with that to explain how that number was generated. And of course, it's not your full standard operating procedure or your inventory management plan that's 100 pages long, but it's a condensed version that an external reader can understand, pick up, and simply say, okay, now I can compare what company A has done to company B because they have the same policies, or actually they don't have the same policies and they've excluded something from their information. And so those 3 components of the assurance process really come back to documenting audit trail policies as well as appropriate disclosures.
This new regulatory regime that we're talking about, regulatory reporting regime, is addressing a key concern from investors, which is better information to make decisions off of. It also is helping to address another keyword anyone who's worked in sustainability for some time will be familiar with, which is greenwashing. Concerns about greenwashing are ever present in corporate sustainability. How do you see third-party assurance helping to address this concern specifically? And are there particular areas where you think assurance methodologies need to advance to better catch potential greenwashing risks?
I think making sure that you're clear on what the definition of greenwashing is important, because like anything in the sustainability world, we all have slightly different understandings. But where I think about how assurance can address the greenwashing risk is that your assurance providers are ultimately trying to assess whether you've done what you said you've done. So if you have made a commitment and you said that you've achieved that commitment, the assurance provider is coming in and validating that you have achieved the commitment. What we're not doing is saying the plans that you've put in place are the right plans and that they will certainly make sure that you are net zero by 2050. That is outside of our realm. But what we can do is help you understand what you've written and the statements that you've made, how they're read by an external reader, and whether or not they kind of make sense in the context of the commitments that you're trying to achieve. And so I don't know that I would say that the assurance approach needs to evolve per se, but it is really about companies making statements. We're able to validate those statements, but they have to be supportable. Going back to my comments on documentation and audit trail. And so, like I said, making that distinction between prospective goals and ideas and this hope that you will, in fact, meet your goals by doing certain things that may or may not even exist today, like using technologies that really aren't available, is where it's problematic. And so that's where your assurance providers come in and say, actually, I don't think you can say that. You can make factual statements, but you can't go above and beyond that.
It's an important distinction to make. Thank you for clearing that for us. Looking out at the next 3 to 5 year horizon, which now we can say includes this big date of 2030 here at the beginning of 2025, what key changes do you expect to see in how sustainability data flows between companies, their stakeholders, and assurance providers?
It's funny, Grant, because when I started in the space in 2010, I always sort of said, in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to have standards. We're going to have, assurance over this information. Now we are finally here, which is quite exciting for me. So looking into my crystal ball, I think AI obviously plays a huge role in all of this. The amount of data that companies are now going to be required to generate is kind of incomprehensible in some ways. And with the advent of AI, I do anticipate that we will have 100, 150 page reports, similar to what we had before, but actually much more factual and very focused on the compliance requirements. And therefore having AI and bots, running through that information and pulling out the data and the information that they're actually looking for, so that we can have comparable information to look at and then ultimately make decisions on. So I think this was ultimately the goal of investors previously when they started asking for more information, better information. And because we were under voluntary standards, like I said, it was kind of a pick and choose. You can do what you wanted. If it didn't make you look good, maybe you didn't say it. Now there is a mandate to give a full and balanced picture of what it is that you're doing. So with the advent of AI, we'll get more information, but I also think it creates more accountability in the process. And so with transparency and more information out there, we can then assess where we are against our peers, whether or not our projects and our initiatives are actually effective, and make adjustments based off of that. And so what I'm really excited about is the changes that we get to make and ideally the influx of capital in areas that are seen to be successful or actually progressing against goals and targets, as opposed to kind of a hope and a prayer that maybe we'll get there one day because we've said that we will.
Absolutely. Well, more information, better information, documentation. Hopefully it leads us to the path of that capital allocation that we all want to see. Maura, thank you so much for coming to join us in the Trellis Studio. Wonderful to have you.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much.
You just heard from Maura Hodge, partner and U.S. sustainability leader with KPMG U.S.